Hello everybody, this is Dr. Bruce. Welcome to my tutorial on crime analysis data and crime reporting. I am a professor of criminal justice at Husson University in Bangor, Maine, a lecturer at the University of Kansas, and a longtime member of the crime analysis field. In fact, I'm celebrating my 31st year here in 2025. Crime analysis is fundamentally a process of asking and answering questions. These are some of the questions that we might ask as analysts, but there are many, many, many more. And very often those questions lead to new questions. We might ask, who are my top burglary offenders? Have any of them been released from prison lately? Have any of them posted anything on social media lately that might indicate some sort of activity that we could tie them to, some illegal activity that we could tie them to? Which of the neighborhoods in my city have the highest burglary totals? How do those correlate with the populations in those neighborhoods? How does that correlate with the economics and the geographics of those neighborhoods? All of these questions, of course, are supposed to have some sort of operational utility, something that we can give the patrol division or the investigative division or the crime prevention division or to a citizens group or some other unit or organization to do something effective with. But eventually one of two things is going to happen as we go through this cycle. We're either going to run out of questions or, more likely, we are going to run out of data before we have finished answering all of the questions that we would like to know the answers to. Now, any crime analyst's goal is to make sure that happens, the running out of data happens as rarely as possible. It's inevitable to some degree. There's some things we want to know the answers to that we simply don't have the data to support. Who committed last night's homicide, right? We have to go through an investigative process in order to answer that question. We don't necessarily have the data to answer the question. But we want it to, again, happen as rarely as possible. And that means a good crime analyst has a way of tapping into the most common data sources, evaluating, cleaning, structuring that data, and making it available to him or her for regular analysis. So in this video, we're going to talk about how data is captured, what are some of the most common data sources that analysts use, what is structured data, and why is that important, what is relational data, and why is that important, and then finally, what does national data reporting look like in the United States? And that's going to be specific to the United States of America. So let's start by imagining, this situation. A woman has her purse stolen while she's walking down the street, and so she goes to the police station to report the crime, or a police officer comes to her. It doesn't really matter either way, but she gives her statement of what happened in the particular incident. So her statement isn't going to be structured. It's data, no question. But if we could listen to a recording of what she said, it's not going to be structured. It's not going to be something that we can easily search or make use of. Now that's changing with artificial intelligence and large language models and so forth. But historically speaking and generally speaking, unstructured data is difficult to work with. And so it's going to be something like this. And it's going to be a story. She doesn't step up to the counter and say, I want to report a crime. The crime that I want to report is robbery. The robbery was committed on October 3rd, 2025 at 16:30. The location was, she doesn't give the story in a structured way, right? She just tells basically what happened, and it's up to, initially, the police officer to turn this story, which again is data, it's just unstructured data, but to turn this story into structured data that we can actually use to query and aggregate and ask key questions of. Now, there was a time that a police officer would have done that with a paper crime report. He would have filled in all of these boxes, basically, that turn the story into something structured, and then this crime report might have been entered into a database, a computerized database, by some sort of records clerk or something like that. More commonly these days, that report is entered directly into a records management system by that police officer. Through this process, the data is structured and then available to the crime analyst in a data table. Now, this is not the primary purpose of this video, but we do have to be concerned about data quality in this table. There are a number of data quality issues that plague the typical police department based on police officers entering their reports directly into the records management system. And they vary from the officer just not taking a report at all, so there's no data in the system, which occasionally happens. They sometimes select the wrong crime. They misspell things as they enter them. They leave fields blank that ought to be filled in. This image here, you see that this person is from Presque Isle, Maine, but if you're actually from Maine, you know that Presque Isle is spelled Presque space Isle. The officer just heard what he said here and did his best with it, but it was incorrect. We have issues like duplications in key indexes. So this table that you see here is supposed to only have one record per person, and yet this same person is entered like 8 different times in the table, probably because of the confusion with how Latinos structure their surnames. So the analyst does have to be aware of these data quality issues and find ways to control for them. Again, that's not the primary purpose of this video, but it's important just to keep in mind. Now, generally speaking, structured data, as I said, is more useful than unstructured data because we can count it, we can calculate it, we can do things with it that we can't do with data that's, say, in a narrative form. If I've got a bunch of these records, I can tell you how many robberies there were. I can tell you how many robberies there were specifically in 2022 or on East 52nd Street, and how that compares with the previous year, and the average amount of dollar values stolen in those robberies. I can do all of that when the data is structured. Now, structuring isn't a binary thing. It's not just it's either is or it isn't. There are levels of structurization. For instance, with an address, it could be by just putting it in an address field at all and not having it part of the narrative, like it was in the previous story, that then you're structuring it a little bit, right? But then it's difficult to separate its parts out and to determine how many crimes there were on each street or something like that. So the second line shows the data a bit more structured, with address, city, state, and postal code listed separately. The third line, it's even more structured than that, with the unit separated from the rest of the address. And the last line is about as structured as we could get, with the street number, street, unit, city, state, and postal code separated differently. I suppose we could carve up that street into 2 separate fields for the street name and the street suffix or something like that. But you basically stop structuring when you reach the point that it would serve no additional utility to structure it anymore. And I think that we've typically reached that point at the bottom line here. Now, this structured data, as we've talked about, is stored in data tables, right? This is what a data table looks like: a bunch of different fields, a bunch of different records. And start in my video number 3, we look at actually how to start working with this data, how to filter it, how to aggregate it, how to ask the most common types of questions of it. But we can do that as long as the data is stored in a table. However, most phenomenon that we have to work with in crime analysis are too complex for data to be stored in a single table. Now, for a long time, that's all there was, one table, because we didn't have computerized data systems, so you really couldn't do anything like a relational database. That's why if you're an old person and you remember going to the library up until about, I guess, the end of the 1980s, you found 3 different card catalogs. You would have one card catalog with the author, one card catalog sorted by the title of the book, and one card catalog sorted by the subject of the book or keywords, because you couldn't keep it all in one place, because fundamentally that's relational data, right? But with manual systems, you don't have the tools to look at a data set from all those different angles. Whereas a proper relational database, which is what almost everything uses these days, allows you to combine multiple tables together to ask your questions. So we have the typical structure of a typical records management system here. We have a core incident table that includes things like the date and time of the incident and the location of the incident. Then you've got a related offenses table because you could have more than one offense committed in the same incident. You've got related vehicles, related property, and related persons because, again, you can have more than one of those things in each incident. And if you have to ask a complicated question, like my earlier one, let's say you have an active series of burglaries and a witness has described the offender as a white male in his 50s with a tattoo of a dragon on his right arm. You want to know, show me all the incidents we've ever had where we've arrested or suspected a white male in his 50s with a tattoo of a dragon on his right arm. We would need to combine offenses and incidents and persons, at least, to answer that particular question. Now, don't worry, relational databases are a pretty advanced concept, and we're not going to jump right into that. There's a few more videos before that becomes terribly important. But just keep in mind that that's where you have to eventually get if you're going to be good as a crime analyst, because you can't just work with a single data table. Once you really learn about relational databases, you'll find them everywhere you look. Amazon, IMDb, social media, streaming services, they all have relational databases at their core with a variety of different data tables. Now, all my examples so far have come from crime reporting, right? Somebody is a victim of a crime, and they report it, and that data gets structured and entered into a database from which the analyst can retrieve it. But there's lots of data sources that we use in crime analysis. Those crime reports are definitely a key data set, and I would say that probably most of what crime analysts do at least use the crime reporting system as a primary data source. But that doesn't mean it's the only data source they use. And you can see, and this is not in any way an exhaustive list, because you never know where the question is going to take you, right? You never know where a particular line of analysis is going to take you. So you have to sometimes go and find the data that you need for the particular question set that you're trying to ask. I remember an analyst in California who was analyzing thefts from vehicles and wanted to be able to calculate rates of theft per parking lot. She could count up the counts easily enough, how many thefts were there in each parking lot, but she wanted to know which were the most dangerous parking lots based on the number of parking spaces, right? Because if a lot that has 50 parking spaces has 500 thefts a year, that is a lot worse than a lot with 500 spaces having 500 thefts a year. But there's no data source for that you can easily tap into, the number of parking spaces per parking lot, at least not that she had. She had to go out and collect that herself by looking at aerial photographs and literally probably having an intern count the parking spaces, and then she created her data set. Sometimes you have to do that as a crime analyst. You have to create your own data based on the research question. But there's lots of existing data sources out there that we constantly tap into. Crimes, as I talked about, is the number one. Those are stored in the police records management system, and they make up the bulk of what crime analysts have to do. Now, in addition to crimes, you have other calls for police service that don't necessarily result in crime reports. So in the typical agency, a police officer only has to take a full report when an actual crime has been committed. Or maybe in other cases when something weird happens and they need to document it. But the typical call for service for a noise complaint, or somebody's blocking my driveway, or there's a water main break, or there's a sick-looking skunk in my yard and I think it might have rabies, or my neighbors are having a loud fight over something, not a physical fight, just a loud fight. Somebody's had a heart attack, there's a traffic crash, right? These are all things that aren't necessarily crimes that police have to go to. In fact, about 90% of what police go to is not criminal. It's those other calls for service, where most police departments don't require them to take a full report. The only records of those incidents are in the computer-aided dispatch, or CAD system, which is a fairly limited data set. It doesn't really give you the quality of what happened. But it does tell you how long they spent on scene and what they responded to and what the disposition of the call was. So that can all be very useful information. There are patterns and trends and hotspots in those calls for service. Things like I didn't put arrests on this list, but arrests are going to be a subset of the crimes, obviously. The crash data set is vital if you're looking to analyze traffic collision hotspots. You have things like field interviews, traffic citations issued. What happens later on when the case goes to court? What sentence did the person get? What percentage of our arrests result in a guilty verdict versus a not guilty verdict? What percentage result in a plea bargain? Right? These are all things that are available in maybe a court data set. Who, from our top offender list is currently in prison? When are they getting out? When do we have to be worried about them again? Are these offenders probation officers, right? These are all questions that we might have to ask that require access to these different data sets. And so I'll let you look at the rest of them. Again, it is not in any way a comprehensive list here, but the thing to understand is all of these different data sources we go to might have a different level of structurization or might not be structured at all. Social media is a really good example of data that is inherently not structured. It actually is a bit structured in the social media company's database. So, your Facebook postings are a little bit structured in Meta's database. They'll have a lot of metadata. They'll have the time and the place and the location, the coordinates and so forth where the posting was made, and there will be some keywords and so forth, but you don't get that. You can't tap in as a crime analyst, none of us can, tap into Meta's database and get that structured data. We have to either accept the fact that it's unstructured or structure it ourselves in our own data set. That would be a lot to do with social media data unless it was for a particular person that we were paying attention to. So the point is, for all of these different data sources, we have to be concerned about first of all, is the original data structured? And then can we access the structured data? And then can we access all the data? So that's what the access depth means, right? So a good example maybe would be like motor vehicle search records. So if I want to look up somebody's motor vehicle license information, what cars they're registered to, their own license, when their license expires, what restrictions they have, I can do that. The Motor Vehicle Bureau maintains a very structured database of all those people and their cars, and I can probably go to a search form and enter some search criteria, maybe an age range or a race and a sex or something like that, and get the people that match the search. But what I can't do is download that full data set and do whatever I want with it. So the data is structured, my access to it is structured, but I don't have access to a complete data set. And that's what I've listed here as structured, incomplete. Right? I can't download the data set and then tie it into my other data and ask questions of it jointly. That doesn't work. And then you have some data that's just inherently unstructured, and my access to it is unstructured, and therefore, again, there's a limited amount I can do. I can't keyword search crime scene photographs. Again, that's changing, obviously, with artificial intelligence, but the average police department doesn't have that implemented yet. So I can't say, from all these photographs, show me, the ones that have a picture of a bird or a gun or something like that, with the typical tools that an analyst has. Okay, that's about what I wanted to cover in terms of data sources and what data looks like. In my video number 3, we talk about what to do with it, how to start to analyze structured data. But for now, I want to pivot and talk about crime reporting and understanding how our crime reporting systems work, because that's something that's vital for every crime analyst. And so I have a chart here basically showing crime rates in the United States from 1960 to 2023. As I'm recording this, 2024 has just become available, a little bit earlier than normal, but I haven't had a chance to include it in the chart yet. But as you can see, violent crime and property crime rose steadily from the 60s into the 80s and 90s. Property crime peaked in 1980, but had a second peak in like 1990. Violent crime kept going up until the early 1990s, about 1992, and then we had a big decrease in crime in the 1990s that continued into the 2000s and really only started to level off in the 2010s. Property crime has continued to even go down a bit more. COVID kind of messed with the numbers a little bit, but generally speaking, we're at our lowest levels of property crime in most people's lifetimes. It's becoming a lot harder to steal things with all the cameras and so forth that we have available. But the question that we need to ask is, where does this data come from? How do we know what national crime reporting looks like? Now, if we were most of the countries in the world, like Ukraine or Iran or I guess probably France, Belgium, right? We would not have to answer that question. It wouldn't even be a question that anybody would think to ask because there's only one police service in those countries, and they all share the same system for entering their crime reports, and they all share the same definitions. Those countries aren't even federalized countries. They don't have a federal government, state government relationship like we do in the United States and Canada and Mexico and maybe about a dozen other countries. Most countries have one government system, one police service, and if they want to know how much crime there is in their countries, they just have to go to one database. That is not the case in the United States. We have 18,000 different police agencies in the United States, each with their own record system. That's not entirely true. There are some that are on combined records management systems, but they're still very local. We're very hyper-localized when it comes to police departments in the United States. So we've got all these different records management systems, and not only that, but the crime definitions vary from state to state. And so, what is a murder in one state might be a manslaughter in another state, or what is a burglary in one state might only be a theft in another state. If you steal a golf cart, it's an auto theft in some states, and it's not in others, and so forth. So we needed a way to sort of standardize this reporting to determine how much crime there is in the United States. Here, for instance, is California's definition for burglary. And you commit a burglary in California if you enter any house, apartment, tenement, shop, warehouse, store, mill, barn, stable, outhouse, vessel, floating home, railroad car, any of these things. If you enter them and there's no time restriction or not on these, if you enter these things with the intent to commit a misdemeanor or a felony, then you have committed a burglary. Whereas in Massachusetts, in order to commit a burglary, it has to be a house that you've entered, or an apartment, but a dwelling place. It has to be a house, and you have to enter it at nighttime, and you have to have used force. You can't just open the door and wander in, whereas in California, none of those things is true. Now, what happened is the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program came along and said, all right, we're just going to assign a national definition, a vernacular definition for crimes. So their definition of burglary is much closer to California's definition. So Massachusetts agencies, irrespective of what they charge the offender with if they happen to arrest him, irrespective of that, they're supposed to code their crime reports with these national definitions of crime and then report those statistics to ultimately the FBI. Right? So that's the system that came along in the 1920s. It was created by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the only federal justice agency at the time was the Federal Bureau of Investigation, so they gave it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, to administer. These days, we have a whole Bureau of Justice Statistics, and it would make a lot more sense if they administered the UCR, but unfortunately, they don't. We still allow the FBI to do it. It took like 30 years before there was any good national data under this program, which is why my chart here starts in 1960. Partly of the reason is it's all voluntary. We can't force police agencies to participate in this program. Most of them want to. It looks a little bit embarrassing for them if they're not participating, and there is some like grant money that's tied to participation, but there's no law forcing them to do it because it would be outside of the powers of the United States Congress to tell local police departments in the states what to do. So we have to rely on the police departments themselves to participate in this program. Like I said, it took a long time to get everybody to this level. Now, this is how the process typically works in the typical agency, and this is the system that was set up in 1929. We've got the victim who reports the incident to the police. That goes through the computer-aided dispatch system, and then the police officer enters the crime report into the records management system. Somebody, ideally in the agency, reviews the report for accuracy and coding. This part is not well done in some departments, but ideally it's done. I put clerk, but it really could be anybody who does it. And then at the end of the month, and again I put clerk, but it could be an analyst, it could be a sergeant, it could be anybody in the department, just whoever's assigned this duty. Somebody counts how many of each type of crime was committed and submits those counts to the state crime reporting unit. So they submit, to the crime reporting unit. We had 40 burglaries, we had 20 robberies, we had 1 homicide, we had 15 auto thefts, etc. And then the state might do their own thing with it. They might issue their own reports about crime in that state, but then there's somebody at the state level, the head of the crime reporting unit, who has to pass on that information to the FBI. The FBI takes that information, cleans it, compiles it, analyzes it, and issues national crime statistics. And this typically takes about 9 to 10 months. So it's the fall typically before the national crime statistics come out for the previous year. Again, this year it's a little bit earlier, which is nice. Now, they used to publish it in this big book called Crime in the United States. Hundreds and hundreds of pages, and every police agency would get a copy. Now they do it, of course, on the website. It used to look like this, but now they have something called the Crime Data Explorer, which looks a little bit different. So this is a system we had for a long time. And the problem with this system is that, okay, we get national crime statistics, but we can't really tell anything about the crimes, right? We can tell you how many more robberies there were this year than last year, but we can't tell you what weapons are being used or what's being stolen or how much is being stolen or whether the victims are suffering any injuries, or we can't tell you anything about the offenders and the victims. Locations, specific locations other than the city, we can't tell you. And so starting in the 1980s, the FBI started to replace this system with a newer system called the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Note the change of the title of the slide up at the top, NIBRS, or the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And under this newer system, agencies don't just report counts of crime, but they report line by line records of every crime that happened, along with the date, the time, not the location, but except in some states, but the date, the time, the type of offense. There can be more than one offense. The old system, the summer reporting system, only recorded one primary crime, not multiple offenses. It has demographic information about the victims, the offenders. It records what property was taken. It doesn't record the specific location, but it records the type of location. So whether it was a shopping mall or a street corner or something like that where the crime happened. So all of this data gets sent to the state unit now, and that gets sent to the FBI. And now we can drill down into the data and ask deeper questions about what's going on. Except that it is taken. So watch the middle of the screen here, and you'll see that's the big change between the two systems. Instead of counts, we now submit information about each individual incident. The problem is that this system was created in the early 1980s, and here we are 40 years later, and a good portion of the city's police agencies still are not on board with this newer system. So it's taking a long time to convert over. The FBI tried to set a hard deadline for 2020 and said we're not going to accept any summary statistics after 2020. But a lot of big agencies especially called their bluff and submitted no data in 2021. So we have sort of a data gap in 2021 for the country, and then the FBI blinked and said, okay, we'll start taking the old system numbers again in 2022 because otherwise we had no data in our major cities. Why is it so difficult for agencies to switch? Well, the biggest difficulty, I think, is found in bullet point number 5 here on the right-hand side for National Incident-Based Reporting System, numerous data quality standards. So in the old system, they just kind of took your word for it. You said it was a robbery, it's a robbery. They would audit some agencies. If you were reporting, more homicides than aggravated assaults, or you were reporting more burglaries than thefts, that always looked a little bit suspicious, and they might, ask you to verify that you really had that many. But generally speaking, you just had to accept an agency's word for it when it came to its crime statistics. Under NIBRS, there's a lot of data quality standards, so you can't submit an aggravated assault if you don't have either a serious injury or a weapon. And if those fields are blank, then it's going to kick back an error and say, how is this an aggravated assault? Did you miscode the crime, or did you forget to fill in these fields? You can't submit a burglary or a theft without a property stolen. You can't submit a burglary without indicating whether it used force or no force. Right? You can't say that the suspect and the victim knew each other and then not have any record of who the suspect was. So there's a lot more than that. I mean, there's hundreds, maybe even thousands of data quality standards. And so, I worked for the Danvers Police Department in the 2010s, 2000s, and it was my responsibility to fix the problems. So at the end of a month, I would submit the data, and then I might get back a report saying, hey, these 5 incidents have errors, you got to fix them before we'll accept this, and I would have to go in and fix them. Well, that Danvers is a small agency. You got to imagine that, like, the New York City Police Department gets back that report, and it says you've got these 5,000 errors that you have to fix before we'll accept your submission. So unless these larger agencies are willing to invest a lot in clerical work for data reporting, for why would they? Then they're really never going to be able to report data under this new system, even though their record systems are theoretically capable of it. So there's some other changes here under the UCR process. The summary. I'm sorry. All of this is UCR. Uniform Crime Reporting is the master header above all of this. And then the old system was called the Summary Reporting System, and the new system is called NIBRS. It gets confusing because a lot of people say UCR when they mean the old system. But UCR hasn't gone away. NIBRS is part of UCR. So, but as I say, it gets a little bit confusing. But technically speaking, it's SRS versus NIBRS. So under the SRS, there were 8 index crimes: murder, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, burglary, theft, or larceny, they sometimes called it, and auto theft. That's 7, and then arson got added in, I think, the 1980s. So those were the 8 index crimes. And those got to be so ubiquitous that a lot of agencies to this day, when they publish their agency statistics, mostly publish just those 8 crimes. But there's a lot of stuff that was excluded from that list, right? The kidnapping, fraud, embezzlement, drug offenses, liquor offenses, prostitution. I mean, just a ton of stuff isn't included in those 8 primary offenses. So the new system, NIBRS, has 49 offenses in the Group A, the equivalent of the old Part 1. So a lot more gets reported under the NIBRS system. Then again, the NIBRS system doesn't have a hierarchy rule, so all offenses that, with some exceptions, all offenses typically that occur in an incident are reported. So if you break into somebody's house and then murder them in their home, in the old system that would have just been a murder, the most serious crime. In the new system, that's a burglary and a murder. And we've basically covered the rest of these. Participation in the new system varies a lot by state. There are some states where almost everybody's on board, and some states where almost nobody is. So because of that, we have not been able to fully realize the dream of NIBRS, which is having a real good data set that we can drill down into and ask questions about, so that when murder goes up or down, we're not just speculating, but we actually have hard data on the differences across those years. So you'll still see a lot of stuff is reported under the old system as for a long time, and it's still going to be a few years before everybody's on board with NIBRS. But that is what our national crime reporting looks like in the U.S. If you're from another country that has a unitary government and only one police force, you probably get a chuckle out of all of this because it's so easy for you, but it's pretty difficult for us. Now, in all of this, we always have to remember that there's a lot of crime that doesn't get reported. Okay? And these are some estimates from a few years ago on the percentages of crime that do not get reported. Now, how do we know how many crimes don't get reported? Well, because we have another way of getting crime statistics called the National Crime Victimization Survey, or the NCVS, where researchers call people and they ask them directly about their victimization. So if they never reported it to the police, it should still come up in those NCVS calls. The problem is the NCVS it only samples about 100,000 households across the country, which sounds like a lot, but you divide that by 50 states, and while you can estimate national crime figures from the NCVS, you really can't estimate state-by-state crime figures, and especially you can't estimate city-by-city crime figures. But comparing the national results with the NCVS to what's reported to the FBI, they can come up with these statistics about underreporting. And it turns out that motor vehicle theft is the most reported crime at almost 80%. And you can understand why that happens. Motor vehicles are pretty expensive. Most people know that the only way they're going to get their car back is if they report it to the police. And certainly the insurance company is not going to give them a payout if there's no crime report. So that incentivizes people to always report motor vehicle theft. But a lot of other crimes, homicide isn't on here because obviously you can't ask people about their experiences with homicide from the NCVS, but homicide is very highly reported. It's probably in the 80s or 90s because you have a body, and so it's really hard to conceal that. Only if the person goes completely missing and is buried and so forth do you not have a homicide report. But yeah, everything beyond that is pretty much below 50% for crime reporting. And, there's a lot of reasons people don't report crimes. Some of them they don't think that the police can do anything. They're embarrassed. They want to handle it themselves. They just don't want to. Maybe they're an illegal immigrant. They don't want to come to the attention of the police. They don't want to get the person in trouble who committed the crime. And there's a lot of reasons that people don't report crimes. So sometimes they're not even aware of it, right? If a tool goes missing from your garage, did somebody steal it or did you just misplace it somewhere? So because of that, we just have to be aware of that as crime analysts, that our crime data set isn't necessarily going to be all of the incidents that have taken place. And if you're analyzing a pattern or a series, you have to be aware that you might be missing reports in that series. Even robbery, a pretty serious crime where people are often subjected to threats of violence or death with weapons, has a less than 50% reporting rate, and we can't always rely, therefore, on the completeness of our data set. One last thing that's worth looking at in terms of national crime statistics is the crime clearance rates, and I should have updated this with more recent data, but it hasn't budged a whole lot in 20 years. So despite all of the advances that we have in forensic science, in video recording of locations and so forth, we still tend to clear very few crimes. So the one crime that has a decent clearance rate is murder, because murder, being a very, very serious crime, is heavily investigated. Everyone gets investigated, at least somewhat, right? You don't have any murder reports where the police don't do anything. Whereas that does happen a lot with burglary and theft and robbery, where an incident is reported and it receives no investigation whatsoever. The high clearance rate for aggravated assault is largely because most incidents, about half of those incidents, the victim knows who the offender is, right? So it's a spouse or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a friend or something like that, and so they're able to tell the police officer right away who did it, and therefore the officer is able to make an arrest or get a warrant at least for an arrest, which will later turn into a clearance. So that's why those are so high. Rape's clearance rate is very low. And by clearance, by the way, this doesn't imply that anybody is prosecuted. It doesn't imply that there's a conviction. This is just the number that the police are able to say, yes, we know who did it, and we at least advanced the charges on for prosecution, regardless of what happened. Rape is very, very low. Robbery is low. And the other one, property crime, as you can see, is below 20%. And the worst part about that is that, a lot of those are going to have been cleared by the police officer who first takes the call. So larceny theft, for instance, with an 18.4% clearance rate, almost all of that is shoplifting, where shoplifting doesn't even get reported unless the store has already identified a suspect, right? Because if somebody steals something and gets away, the store doesn't even know it was stolen, so it doesn't get reported in the first place. So you have to have caught somebody, typically, for a shoplifting incident to be reported, which means you've got video or you've got the person there in the store, and therefore the police, when they show up, they can make an arrest right on the scene. So if you removed those from the larceny theft category, probably the clearances would be down in the single digits. They'd be like 3% or 4%. Why is our clearance rate so low, despite all the forensic evidence we have, all the video we have, everything else? We just don't have enough investigators in the typical police department to give every case like that the full court press. And so a lot of crime that could be solved is unsolved just because of personnel and time issues. Certainly a good crime analysis unit can assist with improving clearance rates. So that is what I wanted to cover with this video. We've looked at how data is captured in the typical police department. We've looked at the different data sources that crime analysts use. We've looked at what structured data means. We've looked a little bit at what relational data means. And we've looked at how the National Crime Statistic Reporting System works in the United States. I hope that that's all very clear to you. If it's not, you are always welcome to get in touch with me by telephone, by email, or by text, or whatever you want. I'm always happy to talk about these issues even more. In the next video in this series, we will explore some techniques to work with structured data, to ask questions about it, to start really getting into the analysis process. Thank you very much.